A woman on TikToker named Anna, who also goes by Creative Chronicles, had a really good post. Really good. She picked up on something that Jamie Dimon had to say on the Wall Street Journal's podcast and offered some commentary. It's good.
I hate to be all doomsday on this app, but America is f***ed, dude. I was just listening to The Journal, which is a Wall Street Journal podcast, and they had Jamie Dimon, who is the CEO of JP Morgan, which is the largest bank in America, on it. And within 2 minutes, my jaw was dropped at the shit he was saying. It is so f***ing out of touch. And this is the largest bank in America. I had to stop and make this TikTok. Here you go.
As the chief exec of America's biggest bank, you have an unrivaled insight into the financial health of the U.S. consumer. What are people doing with their money right now?
Yeah, you have to look a little bit in context. The consumer's in pretty good shape right now. The consumer has, unemployment's under 4%, has been there for 2 years. They still have excess money from COVID. If you go back to looking at the amount of money that was spent during COVID, it was $6 trillion through various means and various programs. They're still spending it down. Housing prices are up, stock prices are up, jobs are plentiful.
I'm sorry, what? The stimulus checks, the ones that went out in 2020 and 2021, 3 and 4 years ago, we're still spending it down? Who is he talking about? People are not doing well. This country is literally unaffordable. Childcare, groceries. You've got colleagues out here telling us to eat cereal for dinner. Everything is up in price. Even for those who are making ends meet and are able to still save, we have to be conscious as to where you're putting your money, because nothing is at a good price. What does he mean the consumer is doing well? Like, these are the biggest decision makers in our financial systems. These are the people who work with Congress and who are talking about how do we create like a soft landing of inflation. And he thinks we're doing okay. Like, guys, this is scary. I mean, it's been scary. Let's be real. No one's surprised.
For reaction to that commentary, please be joined by James Perry, founder, CE, and CIO of Perry International Capital Partners. Jim, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning, Dan. Thank you.
A bit of a disconnect between Jamie Dimon and young Anna there when it comes to how well the consumer is doing.
Precisely. I think that the consumer in the country is going to be led to slaughter here as the government continues to stimulate so that this debt-fueled economy can keep going for the stock market and for the government and for Wall Street. And the consumer, which is, the silent majority of people that have to deal with all of this inflation, food prices up 40% since the pandemic, and gasoline prices are up 50%. This stuff's not going away. And the Fed seems to not really care about the plight of the average household,
You mentioned in one of your missives to your clients that the market liked what the Fed did this week, and essentially saying that we're not going to see the number of rate cuts that were initially anticipated. The handle is what maybe we get one rate cut this year, but the point is to say that they're holding serve because inflation is running hotter than they anticipated and they want. And they think by doing so that will reduce the possibility that it continues to run as hot as it is. Is that essentially the read? The market is fine with that because it provides some stability as opposed to taking the risk of a rate cut in the near term and
right.
And possibly fueling another spike in inflation.
Right. There's a lot of moving parts to that statement, and I'll just try to kind of break it down a little bit. If you look at the economy, debt really helps Wall Street, and it helps the stock market, and it helps the government. The problem with allowing inflation to run hot is that it's causing extreme volatility in the markets because the Fed has really got kind of a conflicting message and conflicting response to things. I mean, we've got slowing growth, rising inflation, excessive indebtedness, and, surging deficit spending. So the economy, I'll give you a quick example. The Atlanta Fed does a GDP now sort of forecast every kind of day when data comes out. So it's not really a forecast. It's just kind of a snapshot. But, right now, and we saw these numbers last week, real GDP is growing only at 1.6%, right? Which is not very high. But if you look at the bigger number, the average growth rate in the economy this year is running at 6.26%, right? So what that tells you is that real growth is at 1.6%, and the reason you're getting a higher number is because inflation is running at like 4.75%. And economists measure inflation differently than people do. Economists look at like incremental little sort of quarterly and annual upticks. But the fact is, inflation never goes down. It hasn't gone down for 20 years. It's still rising. So the idea that Powell says we're making good progress on inflation is really quite disingenuous. I mean, Fed policy is not restrictive. And he said it was the other day. It's highly stimulative, And I think that only a Fed chairman can say that because he's working for the government, and the largest shareholder of the Fed is, back to your TikTok friend's little comments, J.P. Morgan is the Fed's largest shareholder. So that's the crowd he's playing to. And
he also said we're not in a stagflationary environment, but we have slow growth and relatively high inflation that's increasing, as you just described. Isn't that the textbook definition of stagflation?
Yeah, when he said that the other day, and he started going on about I don't see the stag and I don't see the inflation. I just kind of went, well, let's see, 1.6% growth is kind of slow growth, and inflation running at 6.25% is high inflation. So I don't know, maybe he's comparing 1981, but on a percentage basis, the stagflation scenario is much sharper today than it was at the peak of the inflationary surge back in the early 80s. So I find it disingenuous at best.
So we had a relatively modest jobs number in April, 175,000 new jobs, and I know that's what Powell has wanted for a long time, is for the labor market to cool off. Is that now starting to happen, and what will that mean for wage growth? Because of course, the reason that these the prices in the grocery store and the pump are so challenging for so many people is because their wages aren't keeping up with the price increases.
Right. Inflation is really only structural and systemic when you have wage inflation, and you do. Just a slight backtrack here for a second. 175,000 jobs is pretty good, really, considering that, the Fed did move 11 times to 5.5%, and the economy has never really buckled under this. We had some regional bank stuff, and there's some hedge funds going out of business, but, by and large, the commercial real estate market's holding up remarkably well. Housing prices are at all-time highs, and this is an interest rate-sensitive sector of the economy, right? The most sensitive. Automobile sales, Wards came out, one of these sort of groups that follow vehicle sales. They're running at a rate of 15.75 million units a year. This is almost back to pre-pandemic levels, and prices of cars are up 25 to 30%. So, the interest rate-sensitive sectors of the economy have not gotten hurt like the Fed expected they would do. Now, back to the point on the jobs, the recent data has really shown remarkable stability in the labor market. I mean, a year ago when the Fed got to 5.5%, the last Fed hike was in July of 2023, by the way, right? That's a long time ago. But when we got to 5.5% in Q2 and Q3 of last year, Powell and the Fed said they thought that the unemployment rate would be 4.5% to 5%, right? It's 3.9. It's been under 4% for something like 2 years, as Jamie Dimon said, right? So things are going well in the labor market, and job growth is still very, very strong. And that's because demand in the economy is strong. The Fed, Jamie Dimon said $6 trillion. The Fed has spent, or the government, I should say, between the Treasury and the Fed, have basically printed $11 trillion worth of money. That money is flowing through the economy, and this is why demand continues to be high. The economy is still doing okay, but the people who are spending the money don't care about price increases as the people who are on fixed incomes and things, So it's really a very bifurcated economy, and I think that, the short little scenario today, the summary is that the strong jobs market has really made the Fed's job easier to stay right where they want to. And they're still printing money, So steady as she goes through the election because Washington wants the administration to stay in power.
Well, that means we should be bullish about about equities at least through this calendar year then, right?
Yeah, I think, as I said in my little note after the Powell was speaking the other day, the stock market loves this. I mean, debt-fueled expansion is great. They love inflation. Wall Street loves inflation almost as much as the government does. And that's the crowd they're playing to right now, Dan.
Mm-hmm. The stories in the Wall Street Journal, you mentioned commercial real estate, and then you mentioned where home prices are. Let's talk about home prices for a little bit and corporate influence in home prices. The story in the Wall Street Journal this week about, basically politicians starting to look at the accumulation of housing stock by big corporations, which is in part reducing supply and increasing price. It's part of the conversation. Right. Is that something these and then of course it draws in all of these ghouls like Klaus Schwab who don't believe that anyone other than them should own property. So, right. So what are we to understand about those big players that are gobbling up a lot of housing stock? What the impact is? What at present into the near term? What the play is there? Right.
These big guys like BlackRock and many others, Carlyle, KKR, many others, who have been allocating private equity capital toward housing stock. These guys are not stupid, right? They see what's going on. And, just to give you an example of that, the CEO of Lennar Home, right, was on TV 3 or 4 days ago, 3 or 4 business days ago, maybe it was 5. And I listen to these guys because, you want to look at these sectors of the economy that are important. Housing, autos, retail, tech, all that kind of stuff. And he said they are very bullish for the next year, and they build new homes, right? So very bullish for the next year because there is a shortage of housing in this country, which is something like 2 to 3 million homes, right? So the BlackRocks of the world and these big private equity guys that are doing this, they're buying new homes, right? And the new homes are being offered to new buyers at discounts to the average market mortgage rates because they're getting points to get in with money early. So I think the housing market continues to stay strong. Owners of real estate are in no rush to sell. Some it's because they've got low mortgages, others because they say, hey, my house keeps going up in value, and the fact is I can rent it out if I have to, but where am I going to go? So I'll just stay here. The housing market's strong because there's a shortage of housing, and these big guys recognize that by building it out and offering it to new home buyers, they're going to make some money, and they're right.
Jim Perry, founder, CIO, Perry International Capital Partners. Jim, thanks as always. Appreciate it.
Dan, thank you. Have a good weekend.
Thanks. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer.
Your show keeps me alive during the week. There's nobody I'd rather listen to between 5 and 9 in the morning than you guys.
On AM 560, The Answer.
Hi, it's Sean Thompson here. You know when you're at the mall and you go to those directory signs, the one that says you are here? Well, imagine that directory is a map of your preparation for retirement. Would you know where you are? My friend Tom Fortino at Alpha Wealth Group is offering you the opportunity to not only find yourself on that map, but also find the route toward a successful retirement. He calls it his retirement roadmap. You'll get an analysis of where you are right now, whether you're at risk if the market drops again, whether you're taking advantage of the latest tax changes, and much, much more. To get an idea where you stand